Therefore, I'm very happy to have my colleague Peter Blenninger here, who's been in banking and insurance and also trading. Then Miro Zaninović, who has done a lot of things, and I've worked with him and with my clients for many years. And he was the first of us here in the tech community to look into ESG and supporting technologies. And then we have our AI specialist, who already was on stage today. Yeah? So, and the three of them now try to demystify this entire thing. So, have fun, learn something.
So thanks. First, welcome from my side. So my slide disappeared. I hope they come back when I press the button. And you are brave, yeah? This is now the second term in talking about green issues, and you are still here. So thanks for that. Yeah, we have. We start with a short presentation. I try to be really short. It's not working. So we do it the old-fashioned way. Maybe this is working. No. We do have some issues with the slides. I don't know why. Next time I prepare more jokes up front. Okay. Here it is. And now it goes. Okay. Perfect. So, if you want to, if you want it to stay like it is, you have to change everything. That's a famous quote. Actually, now my former peer on the panel left. It's from an Italian writer, and I think ESG is something that is important. For some reason. It's about put your money where your mouth is. So when we talk about these green issues and about what everybody could do, then the politician decided that maybe a big leverage is when we nudge the people to put their money where the mouth is. And especially in finance, there are a lot of rules now, and they are forcing money to shift into these sustainable investments. And the consequences for all of you, either in finance or in a normal corporation, is when you don't play according to these rules, it's becoming more and more expensive to get a loan from the market. And the reason is quite easy, because banks and insurance companies somehow have to refinance their activities. And like insurance companies probably have a very strong regulation to invest some major parts of their money into these sustainable funds. Before we really go into our discussions, I would like to clear some of these buzzwords. ESG is for environmental, social, and governance. What does this mean? We try to tackle it down on a simple example. An environmental goal could be, for example, lower emissions to air and water. This is what we focus in our following slides and in our discussion. Social means you as a company also try to tackle your supply chain. So all your suppliers should also follow these sustainable standards that you have in place for your company. And the third thing, and that's very important, it is about anchoring the management of the progress at the board level. So on the supervisory board and on the management board. And that this has some impact. Regulation wants to combine or once the compensation be somehow bound to these achievements of these sustainable goals. So, and everybody heard about sustainability, but nobody gets what it means, especially in IT. That's from my colleague Miro here on the panel. And when we talk about sustainability, it's Actually, one quote that's pretty old, but that brings it to a point. It's from forests. One should not take more out of the wood from the forest than will grow back. That's actually all about sustainability. There are some more complex definitions, but I think that's appropriate for today. The second thing when we talk about greenhouse gas emission is net zero. Net zero means we are cutting our greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. It's impossible to bring it down to zero, but we try to bring it down as close as possible. And greenhouse gases is not just CO2, but there's some other gases. You get the slides, I skip this, which are much more aggressive than CO2. And we have a very tight time frame. So we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in the next 8 years, about 45%. On the niveau of 2010. So that's even more than reducing 45% from what we pollute the air today. And we want to become 100% net zero in 2015. So that's a really short time frame. And the question is, who is in charge? And Joachim mentioned a lot of issues yesterday already, and you are in charge, I'm in charge, our corporations are in charge, our corporate life is in charge, our private life is in charge. And it actually affects everything what we do. And now I would like to stop my short introduction and come to my colleagues on the panel and ask the first question. Miro, how can we know that we make progress in this climate reduction scenario?
Okay. May I try without micro? So first thing we have to do is definitely a carbon footprint. We have to see where we are at the moment. So technically, we have to see how your organization or company produce greenhouse gases. Technically, we are talking not just about CO2, but generally we have to convert these values in equivalence to CO2. The case is, of course, we have to think about our waste management, how much waste do we produce, and our, let's say, emission of the water. Of course, all those values has to be collected and calculated. First of all, the easiest way how you can do, of course, is from your bills, and you will get some, let's say, exact numbers. But technically, when we talk about ESG and climate change, is not just a problem. Let's see where we are. It's just the beginning of your decarbonization journey. So we have to make a clear goal. So idea is continuous progress, continuously to improve us. So we have to find some goal, and we somehow have to try to reduce emission of CO2, emission of water, and emission of waste. But of course, what I tell you now is just one part of ESG reporting. So I'm talking just about environmental part.
So, is it working? Yeah, now it's working. So when we track this issue, I think I can say this because I'm for a couple of years in business. We can compare it to what we did a couple of years ago when we were talking about profit and loss systems and getting this information of our investments at our fingertips and to become near-time or real-time dashboards of how we tackle our emissions or our other goals. I forgot to mention before that this is just one of the sustainable goals. There are 16 other goals. And when we define a strategy and want to see how our progress is, we have to have some systems in place. And to have these systems in place, we have to have these figures in place, and we need some similar tools that we use in finance already for our financial debt and for our financial cash management and then financial management overall. So we need about the same infrastructure for these other goals sooner or later. So Damir, maybe a question for you. When we have this immense, massive data and maybe also some unstructured data, so we know already your approach from this morning. So could you tell us a little bit how you see this this problem, or how can we tackle it with technology?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, I think that not a lot of company already, kind of started. So things about machine learning, advanced analytics, this is something that can definitely help. But even starting from just tracking, simple stuff like water consumption, electricity stuff, uh, it even counts. So, and it's not only, somebody will do it, because we sometimes thought that only companies that have a big factories, and stuff like that kind of need to do this. Uh, I was reading that, for example, training one complex neural network, not like the big one that Google and Facebook does. So this one training is equivalent to maybe 2 to 3 cars. How in the complete life cycle of the cars, how much CO2 emissions kind of are brought into the air. So even our job in an IT, tracking those like electricity in data centers, then thinking about water, the electricity from our buildings, the AC and stuff like that, it can help from the structure data. And then all these other things can definitely help with analytics, with tracking, with more unstructured data, IoT devices, of course. But we need to start with the fundamentals, and then on top of this build something more advanced.
Okay. So how do we get the data that we need, or from what sources, or what's the problem for our audience? Where do we get the information about our CO2 consumption? I think it's quite obvious that when we run data centers that we burn a lot of electricity there for climate and the servers itself, but that's not all. So what other sources?
Yeah. So I think that even if we look at the electricity, the water, the stuff like that, we have it. We have that data because we pay the bills. So somewhere there's this info how much did we kind of used. But part of the problem is that usually that data is kind of siloed. So part of the data may be in the finance, part of the data it can be in other departments. Then if you think about maybe how many cars you have, so this may be in different database. Then thinking about the airplane tickets and stuff like that, this may be in the other system. So this will probably be the first challenge that we need to solve. So how to consolidate all this data in one place so we can have the proper reporting, analytics, and then tracking it in order to see how we are doing it. Because this is the one thing that we said in our framework, that we kind of need to have the goal and then track how we are doing versus that goal.
So normally, I would say a typical company is lost when it comes to these new scenarios, defining new KPIs for measuring stuff like this. And is this just another bullshit regulation that is good for us as an IT service company because we can sell software and consultants hours, or is there something more behind, Miro?
Yeah, okay. Tricky question, but let's say like this. Something when you start to talk, what Damir started to talk is about the scopes. So technically, when we talk about CO2 emission, we have to think about 3 scopes. First scope is definitely something what your company is producing. So by your vehicles and your bills, what is scope 1? Scope 2 in then is a thing which generally depends on who is your energy heating steam supplier. So what are the source of this energy? There's some renewable energy sources, or this is some fuel traditional sources of energy. And something what is coming in the next year as some kind of obligation is scope 3. What we, let's say, generate indirectly. So technically, how much CO2 produce our employees traveling to office, What will happen with recycle is recycle the products that we are producing, let's say our business travels, but what is the very important thing is our purchases and services. So in our, let's say, uh, scoring will be even something what produces, and it will impact us, what produces, or our suppliers, partners, or everybody who work with us. So technically we have a whole chain of information that we have to calculate. And now, answer on the main question. As a consultant, I would like to say now it depends. Last months, I was often in discussion about it.
When you say it depends.
Yeah. The fact is, okay, climate change are happening. We have to do something. As you said, we all responsible. So everybody has to do something, even not just the company's organization, even we as a private persons. But in general, the fact is that these algorithms to calculate, so ESG indicators and scoring are not so mature at all. So especially in the domain of especially in domain of social government, there is a lot of space for interpretation of it. So as we discussed a few days ago, it was, nuclear power plants are very acceptable, for example, in France, but the Germany as a government, the country has completely different opinions about that. So how to score such things and how to put everything in some bucket?
Yeah, that's maybe a good question for Damir. I already mentioned it, and now you mentioned it again. ESG is not only about greenhouse gases; it's also about other goals and other things that are very important. So maybe you can answer us where or what other fields you think is important and where we can help. And
Yeah, sure. So talking about the ESG, people always see this carbon footprint because it's in the media and stuff like that. But the middle part, the S, so the social part is equally important. So things like, I think the best example from the cross example and with the summer internships, where basically the process started of NGOs applying and giving ideas of what could we do, and then students really thinking about how to build a product, building a product, and then donating this software back to the NGOs. I think this is one really good example how this social part is kind of really incorporated into IT environment, and how we can help. It's good for us, it's good for the planet, it's good for the NGOs. I think it's good for everybody. Also thinking about all these parts that go into inclusion, people with any kind of disabilities, technology can a lot help. So I think that here in Zagreb on our faculty, so there's really a lot of teams that are kind of using the VR, AR, AI, so all of these new technologies in order to help kids with disabilities, people with any kind of problems, and this is where we can really help. And it is equally important to the environmental problems that we outlined.
okay, so thank you for that answer. Then maybe we should talk about some more formal aspects in the end. We have these reporting standards that you have to fulfill. Also, there are some regulations how, as a company, you have to measure your progress, how you make it public, how you bring it to your stakeholders, your investors, your banks, where you have mortgage and loans. So, what do we have to know about this? Is there some technical approach that can help us? So who wants to answer this question?
I mean, definitely there are some regulations. So for the companies that are, let's say, big enough and they are over the revenue cap, they are kind of obligated by the law to track and to publish the reports. Also, publicly traded companies, still need to, on a quarterly basis, on yearly basis, do these reports and really track the progress with the scope 1, 2, optionally 3. And I think Miro will can definitely say more about tools that can kind of help, or are there any tools that can kind of help to generate such reports?
Yeah, so definitely, as I mentioned, there are algorithms to calculate CO2, definitely. First of all, as I said, as Damir said, you have to collect all the data from different sources. So let's say bills, you need integration from the different tools, SAP, ERPs, and so on. Second thing, definitely, even IO2 is there involved, so you have to collect different kind of measures and from different methods and measure instruments in your company, so to generate CO2. And then you are coming to the same situation, okay, I put everything one tool, I have to track it, I have to define my goal, I have to know where I am. So technically you need the software. Next thing, of course, you have to track what's happening and you have to generate reporting. But even in the question, we talk about ESG in general, so this is very, I would say, generic topic. There is by United Nations, I think 17 goals, there is about 150 targets and even several hundreds of indicators that you have to answer. So for the regulation, somehow reduce it, but even if somebody score you and rate you, technically you have to give good answers to those questions and give a good statement. So definitely you need a software.
So maybe we are coming to an end. I think there is some regulation in place. There are also measurements and templates how you can report the stuff that you do as an enterprise. And there is also some pressure on the finance guys to restructure the portfolios. But today it's a pretty weak regime and with many holes in it. So it is important that you as a company have really an interest in participating in tackling down these emission things or reaching one of the other sustainable goals, because there are I was on Wednesday, I was on a conference, on a finance conference in Munich, and there are 650 vendors of ESG data out there. And these vendors, they all sat on top of the announcements about the reports from the companies, but then they have that from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, they have these ratings. And every vendor has now its own rating. So one is maybe more interested in a diversity goal, the other in reducing greenhouse gases, and by a smart combination of vendors, you can greenwash any portfolio. So that's just the truth at the moment. And this was, of course, not the intention of the policymakers, but that's the fact today. So when you're an investment company, the only risk you really have is reputational risk. If some investigative journalists reanalyzes your portfolio, like it happened with the DWS in Germany, a big investment company, or some others. But at the moment, there is from the vendor side no methodology how to rate these different progresses company makes. So it's important for you as a company that you have an internal and own interest. And we said we only want to cover these greenhouse gases in this panel because all these other goals are too much for one session. Actually, probably takes weeks to discuss it. And I think we are here about talking what can we do to become future-proof. And for example, when you solve for yourself and your company this energy problem, this means some independence to you. So we, for example, in Cross Zagreb, mount solar panels on the roof, and in the end, we hopefully produce more electricity than we consume ourselves. So when you are somehow independent, and independent means not only from the supplier side, but maybe also some kind of financial independence, this is the first step to act fast on other things. So it is it is kind of an independence in your decisions. And a fast reaction is necessary to react on something on the outside. And to react to changes in the environment or to react to changes in the market, this is agility. This is what makes you future-proof. So we maybe talk about implementing some policy that comes from the EU or even from the UN, but in the end, it's something you should try to achieve for yourself, because it gives you something that you need to become a future-proof enterprise. This is this independence, this is this ability to react on some things that happen in the outside and that maybe you have not on your map. So thank you for taking part in this panel, and if you have any questions, we are welcome to answer them. No questions? Then enjoy the break.